third time to the August workshop meeting of the Southampton Village Planning Commission. We're gonna have two presentations today, on the issue of wastewater management in the village center. This is an issue that has been a concern of the Planning Commission for many years, as we'll talk about in a moment. I wanna start by introducing Nicholas Bono of H2M, who is the consultant who the trustees brought on to do the study for us.
Thanks, Paul. Like Paul said, H2M was retained to pick up somewhat from where we left off on 5+ years ago when we put a map and plan together to evaluate some new alternatives in terms of managing the downtown business district's wastewater moving forward into the future. I think Paul had alluded to earlier, he wants to give a brief rundown of the actual history associated with the wastewater management planning in the village.
So, just to go through some dates for everyone, because this is something the Planning Commission has been looking at for a while, as have the various mayors and trustees. This really for us, I think, started in 2009 when Dr. Goblar and a team, I think then it was LIU Southampton at the time, identified a number of problems with Lake Agawam. At that time, there were a lot of complaints from the residents around the lake about the algae and other problems on the lake, and Dr. Goebel was brought in and did a study which showed the lake had multiple issues. One of the issues that he identified back in 2009 was wastewater from the business district and the nitrogen load in the lake. In 2010, as a result of that, some of the homeowners and the village, the then mayor at the time, Mayor Epley, formed the Lake Agawam Conservancy, whose goal was to find solutions to the lake's issues, both from the private sector and the public sector. And that was followed later that year with the mayor asking the Planning Commission to look at the business district. And the issue that he felt very strongly about is that the zoning should be put in place before a sewer was planned, so that everyone would know what development would be allowed by the sewer as opposed to having to be a black box. So in 2010 and stretching into 2011, the Planning Commission engaged Aaron Krantz, Exton & Kuhn, a renowned planning firm, to study the business district. That study, which had multiple public hearings and workshops and outreach to various interest groups, led to the special zoning district and design guidelines, which were approved by the trustees in 2011. That was a study that received an award from the AIA, and I think we're pretty proud of the Planning Commission of that study. In 2015, the Suffolk County and the state identified Lake Agawam as the most polluted freshwater resource in New York State. And I think that focused everyone on the need to really do an analysis of wastewater management. H2M and a team of consultants were engaged after an RFP, and a sewer map and plan was developed. At the time in 2016, largely because of cost concerns, the wastewater management plan was put on hold, and partially I would say also allowed time for consensus to develop among village residents. In 2018 and 2019, the village actually took some pretty broad action to address storm drainage issues, received grants for catch basins and other elements on Hill Street, on Windmill Lane, and on Jones Lane. And in 2018, a member of the Planning Commission, now mayor, put together on behalf of the commission a menu of all the options that had come out of all the studies and all the people who had looked at the lake. And following that, really at the very beginning of 2019 in the winter, some residents of the lake who had not been active previously in Lake Agawam Conservancy got involved and reinvigorated their role. A little later that year, the new mayor and the new trustees focused on clean water as a priority when they first came into office. A clean water committee was established, and the commission's done a lot of work with them. They've really done a great job. Mark Schiffer's been very involved with them. The town, the county, and state were engaged by the trustees. And the Clean Water Committee created a multi-part agenda to address Lake Agawam with both public and private initiatives. One of the items that they talked about was a wastewater management plan and addressing the stormwater issue from the Village Business Center. I should also say at the same time, the Planning Commission, starting really with the Aaron Krantz X17 study, identified the need for a broader range of uses in the business district if the business district was going to be successful long term. The need for more restaurants, more residences, and other uses that currently the Suffolk County Department of Health do not allow to open in the village. And in the years after the Aaron Krantz study, occupancy rates in the village went through a continual decline for the succeeding 5 years. We are now at a point where our occupancy has picked up. Some of that may be transitory, hopefully some of it will be more permanent, but it is an issue of great importance. So in 2020, the mayor and trustees authorized the Planning Commission to re-examine wastewater management alternative, and I think very importantly for the context of Nick's study, to look at both short and long-term plans. So with that, I'll let Nick get started and
Okay. So, some of this presentation is going to be a refresher, and some of it's going to be new information that's been developed since we last were engaged with the village. So part of the refresher is, again, the village is looking to create a sewer system boundary. Sewer system, sewer district are interchangeable for purposes of how you look at this. The boundary of the village's sewer district essentially would be the entire extent of the village. It would align with the village boundary. And as Paul alluded to also, we were looking at opportunities here to focus on really high priority areas. So we developed a phased approach with input and discussions with some members of the Planning Commission. Essentially our first phase is what it sounds like. That would be your priority area. That would be your first area of focus. That area extends along Hill Street, Main Street, and Job's Lane. The second phase of it would be to extend sanitary infrastructure, sewer system, to encompass the remaining areas in the downtown that would essentially make phase 1 plus phase 2 equal to the boundary that was identified during the previous study that we had done for the village. Subsequent to that, it has recently been identified to consider, and pointer doesn't really work, but consider the properties along North Sea Road from the northern extent of phase 2 up to County Road 39. And there were very preliminary discussions about a potential phase 4, which would look at the residential properties that surround the lake. It was looked at to gain potential favor in terms of pursuing grants. However, upon further investigation on my next slide, you'll see that, well, the key objective again is Lake Agawam, protecting that water quality and improving it. As far as existing build out goes, we had evaluated each one of those areas previously identified, and we looked at them, and most importantly, I want to draw attention to the phase 4 area. Like I said, that area is residential, low density, and it actually meets current sanitary density code restrictions of 600 gallons a day per acre. So looking at that in terms of putting sewers there, being that it's such a widespread area, the cost of infrastructure would be significantly higher than that of residential owners pursuing CPF money if eligible, but to put IA systems in to service them, to replace their antiquated systems. Phase 1, phase 2, again, is the original core area that was identified 5 years ago. And again, like I said, the phase 4 meets the density restrictions associated with groundwater management zone 4. So essentially what we're looking at in terms of ultimate build out, big picture, is to provide service to phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. You can see all of those phases combined is about 254 tax lots, about 118 acres, and the existing flow projection based on health department design criteria is just over 140,000 gallons a day. The existing density across those areas is about 1,200 gallons a day. So part of the study, and again, development and environmental improvement are two key factors, but as far as development goes, you know, there was a zoning overlay done. You need to assess what your future build out could potentially contribute in these areas. So one of the methods, we looked at many, that we thought was appropriate was applying an area weighted flow density from 3 existing downtown Main Street business districts in Suffolk County. The 3 being Village of Patchogue, Lindenhurst, and Bayshore. When you weight their flow density across the areas they serve, you get 3,179 gallons a day per acre. So that would be your flow density. We felt it appropriate to apply that to the phase 1 area only. So when you apply that density to phase 1, it results in almost a 2-time increase in terms of what flow could be generated there. We felt that appropriate to accommodate what potentially could come in after the zoning overlay, after you do have sewer availability. So essentially what we did was we looked at the relative increase in phase 1 from adjusting to the existing Main Street business district densities, and we applied that relative adjustment, that 192.5% flow increase, to both phase 2 and 3. In doing so, we came up with a new flow projection across phase 1, 2, and 3, and essentially increased the total flow over baseline of about 130,000 gallons a day. Okay, it's a significant increase, but I think it's appropriate and reasonable to consider, considering the zoning overlay and the sanitary restrictions you have now. So as far as infrastructure goes, I'm going to kind of step back and just focus on phase 1. Phase 1 is the initial phase. Phase 1 would be the main focus of a map and plan moving forward. So the phase 1 area existing flow is about 45,000 gallons a day, and with the future projection that we just went through, it would increase almost double up to about 87,000 gallons a day. So as far as what you need to accommodate that, you need to know where to treat it. And I think we're all aware that there's been several alternatives tossed around. I know the next presentation is going to focus on one of those alternatives. So that alternative is the existing Southampton Hospital treatment plant. Hospital treatment plant's located in close proximity to the phase 1 area. It will require a Suffolk County Sewer Agency agreement to facilitate how the village can connect to this privately held facility. Capacity expansion and speedy permit modification requirements to be determined. Again, I know there's been additional evaluations done on that facility that you'll hear more about in the second presentation. The main issue with this facility as it stands today, and potentially moving forward in terms of feasibility with expanding that facility, I don't believe it's suitable to accommodate the entire phase 1 through 3 sewering extents that the village is looking at. The other alternative would be a proposed new sewage treatment plant to be constructed outside of the village, just north of County Road 39, There are two properties up there that are adjacent to one another, one of which is owned by the fire department and the other is owned by the cemetery. So with that being said, key considerations for that property are you're going to have to go through a land acquisition process. It is going to be new capital construction costs. So the new capital construction costs will essentially be much higher than what it would be to connect to an existing facility, barring any unforeseen issues or improvements that are necessary there. And that property can essentially support the entire extent of the phase 1, 2, 3 sewer system areas. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm saying both have their benefit. And I think when we look at this as a phased approach, I think there's some middle ground between the two. Essentially what we're looking at right now, and I know there's going to be more detail put forth on this matter, but your phase 1 area could be accommodated by the hospital. There's economic benefits associated with that. There's timing benefits associated with that. However, I think long-term planning, that hospital may no longer become viable as the village seeks to expand their sewer area into the phase 2 and phase 3 areas. So that is the trickiest part of the whole thing. As far as getting the wastewater to the hospital, that's another story. As I see it, your sewering alternatives, it's really routing alternatives. The most straightforward would be a single gravity sewer run through Main Street, Job's Lane and Hill Street. Topography in the area tends to slope from north to south towards the lake. We were looking at a site just to the south side of the boundary. I believe the village acquired a property down there that makes sense to site a pump station on an easement on that lot. And doing this though, the issues are you gotta have reconfiguration of interior building plumbing. You know, everyone goes out to their septic systems in the back. You gotta re-divert flow to the front. Not only that, during construction, there's going to be major disruptions to the storefronts and the sidewalks. So, you know, there's traffic and business issues there. There's also public relation issues. You know, once you start impacting business owners, I'm sure you're all aware, it's not going to make anyone's life easy down here. It's going to be problematic. The overall footage of pipe you would need for this alternative route would be about 3,000 feet. The other alternative would be to route parallel sewers, essentially, behind the storefronts where their existing drains already exit. You don't require interior plumbing modifications. You're not going to disrupt the storefronts and the foot traffic into businesses as much. There is going to be disruption to the parking areas. You're more than doubling the amount of pipe you need. And you also are going to have to negotiate private easements with property owners because you can't service every property from municipal locations within the rears of the properties. You actually have to cross over and bisect different tax lots. That means you're going to require easements to put pipe in those areas. So that does lend to the timing of the whole equation here. If you do select to go with that route option, there is timing there because you do have to get legal counsel to acquire easements for the facilities you're going to install in those areas. So based on those overviews, some preliminary capital construction cost considerations, focused only on phase 1, you have collection and conveyance infrastructure, which would be sewers, force main, and pump station. Based on numbers we've seen recently in areas similar to this, assuming not just pipe installation, but restoration, dewatering, and anything else you may encounter, barring unforeseen contaminants and things of that nature, you would be looking at between $8 and $12 million to put your sewers, your force main, and your pump station in. And that's a range that covers both going in front, or if you opt for the other alternative to route the parallel mains in the back. These numbers are really just focused on construction only. As far as the treatment infrastructure, construction only, I have a number that was generated assuming you were going to build out a facility that could handle the initial phase 1 area at full build out, so it would essentially be a 100,000 gallon a day facility. To build a municipal type facility like that, it would be about $10 million on that property up north. The construction only costs, like I said, represent a range for the two different sewer routing options, as well as construction of a new treatment facility. I don't want to take away anyone's thunder, but I know they have a study that was done. They have costs associated with acquisition and improvements to the treatment plant at the hospital, where they're budgeting about $4 million of improvements worth there to connect to it to serve the phase 1 area. I'm sure more details and questions may come up when they go through that. So the sewer system formation considerations, and really this is the core of the alternatives analysis. These are the questions that need to get answered before we can move forward. Your baseline option would be a village sewer system that's operated, maintained, managed with your own forces. The option 2 would be a village sewer system where you contract out all that operation and maintenance services. Option 3 is village sewer system with a private utility agreement. And again, I have cited here Light Tower Capital Partners and the Suffolk Water and Sewer Company LLC that they're stating they're going to operate under. So option 1 likely is your most costly option. It's the village owning, operating, maintaining infrastructure with your own forces. Without a doubt, this is going to be their most costly option. It does, however, provide the village full control over how you expand your district, how you assess your district, how you manage your district. So there's, with costs come benefit too. Option 2, again, this is village owns the infrastructure but contracts out the operation and maintenance. Village, you have to administer and oversee contract work for operation and maintenance infrastructure, and essentially perform your own quality control on that contractor to make sure that the stuff you own is getting serviced properly with whatever you stipulate in your contract. The last option is you enter into a legal agreement with a private utility who owns and or leases and operates and maintains the infrastructure. So there's many different iterations of how this can evolve, most of which I didn't dive into the detail of until we get input from the next presentation, and that's part of the conversations moving forward. Regardless of whatever option washes out at the end and becomes the selected one to develop your mapping plan or base your mapping plan off of, all of them are going to require review by legal counsel for the formation of a sewer district. The key next steps questions are really to confirm the feasibility of a hospital treatment facility for the phase 1 service area. You need to identify regulatory, fiscal, and legal requirements. And again, that can go any which way. It could be a private utility, it could be a village working out a deal with the property owner. There's a lot of conversations that need to evolve in order to determine what makes the most sense moving forward. Once that is vetted, then we could really push forward and finalize the cost-benefit comparison between the municipal model with contract O&M versus the private utility agreement. Once you vet that and you determine what your selected alternative is, now you have a baseline on which to prepare the mapping plan, and you can form your village-wide sewer system. That's going to be the biggest hurdle. Once you form the sewer system and you get to the point of the mapping plan, you have an outline now on how to move forward. So the next steps after that are proceeding with your design and construction of sanitary infrastructure. So like I said, these first two options are really, these first two bullets up here are really important and necessary in order to move anything forward. Otherwise, it's going to kind of be stuck in the perpetual logjam and somewhat where we ended on the prior study. We did get a little further along, but I think there were certain issues that weren't answered in the beginning stages of that project, which led to it ultimately being put on pause. So I don't know if there are any questions, comments with where we stand.
I think we're going to hold questions for after
Yeah?
the second
Okay.
presentation, and then have questions on everything. So, currently, ready? Great. Let me do a little introduction. Light Tower Group approached the village. Light Tower Group, you approached the village about 6 months ago, I'm thinking. Six months ago with an option for private financing of a sewer system. It's obviously an important alternative for us to look at. We've been working with Light Tower to bring it to a point where it can now get into a public conversation, and this will all be presented to the trustees next month. So I think we're ready to now move this into the broader conversation. So Frank, want to introduce yourself and your team?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Frank McDonough. I'm the managing partner of Light Tower Capital Partners, and I'm joined tonight by two important members of our team. First, our engineering team, R&M engineers, and also our construction team, Kelly Development. Not here, but available, despite the audio issues, are our rate experts, our financing experts, our legal experts, that if there are questions, they can call in and we can address them. My presentation is in two parts. I'm going to do an introduction, then R&M will talk about both the excess capacity and the sewer district, and then Mr. Kelly will talk briefly about construction. I will then address the issues of private development and the utility model. And then if there are questions, we're happy to do that. We began this process as a result of conversations with the Long Island Regional Planning Council, who indicated that one of the great issues on Long Island and the South Shore was water quality. After a review of 236 potential private projects, we narrowed that to 70, then to 20, and the project which came to the top again and again under a number of different rubrics was the Village of Southampton. There were two reasons for that. Number one, because it combined both an internal sewer district issue and an external water issue, meaning Lake Agawam. So in one site, we had the opportunity to demonstrate the ability that a properly arranged and structured governmental private effort could solve these significant problems on behalf of the citizenship. Number two, the issue was of leadership. There is no infrastructure project done anywhere in this country that isn't done unless you have the full-throated support of the administration that you're working with. We found here, both at the mayor and the trustees, and as evidenced by the planning commission, that that support was there. Having done this for 30 plus years, without that type of support, you're wasting your time. Our team, as I've indicated in earlier submissions, has done more than 100 billion of these projects around the country and around the globe, and we're willing to bring that expertise here to the Village of Southampton. What really struck us, and as a long-term resident, someone whose family has been out in the Riverhead area since the 19-teens as farmers, is that we spent 50 years studying this problem. 50 years of another engineering report, 50 years of waiting for something to happen, 50 years of waiting for a government grant, 50 years of deterioration of our water system. So we embraced the challenge of the Long Island Regional Planning Council and brought a range of expertise that you have seen in our consulting engineers report. Our conclusion, 50 years is enough. Now is the time to do something, and we're prepared to do that promptly if we're selected in this position. There are two issues that I've indicated that we're going to address. One is capacity. Is there excess capacity at Southampton Hospital? Can we get that capacity, which is a bit of a presumptuous question? And second, what would our sewer district look like if in fact we had that? So both Chris and Matt Scheiner are going to talk about that. When they finish, then Mr. Kelly will come up and talk about the construction costs, and then I'll wrap up. We're going to try and keep this brief to allow as much time as possible. But since you have a very fulsome report from us, we're available not only today, but any time that you have a question on that.
Let me just add, we will put both of these on the website, so everyone watching this can also access it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt, Chris?
We can share.
We have plenty.
Do you have any for the audience?
Yeah.
Yeah, let us share and quickly,
An extra mic.
Okay.
All right, thank you. My name is Matt Shiner. I'm with Robinson and Muller Engineers. We were engaged by Light Tower Capital to perform an analysis of the existing sewage treatment plant at the Southampton Hospital. Our report is part of the report that I just distributed to you all as an appendix. We did a pretty thorough analysis. We took samples, we did readings of flow. We followed all the standard calculations that are performed of an analysis of this type that would normally be submitted to the health department to ensure that the amount of available flow that is assumed, thank you, is appropriate. So assuming this project moves forward with Light Tower, that exact report that we have prepared is the report that would be submitted to Suffolk County Department of Health Services. Based on that report, we have determined that there is approximately 62,000 or just over 62,000 gallons of flow available in that treatment plant. Based on that, and in conjunction with the maps that we have looked at from H2M prior to our analysis, we prepared a map that you have in front of you, and that's on the screen now, which shows our proposal for what would be connected to the hospital plant as your phase 1 project. And you can see the proposed flow is just a little bit over 61,000 gallons. So a little bit more than H2M's phase 1, but definitely within the limitations of the hospital treatment plant existing infrastructure. So based on that, we put together this map. We would be happy to work on, further analysis of where the sewers would be located. I know in Nick's presentation a few moments ago, he offered 2 options. So similarly, that's something that can be determined at a later time. But we believe that this is something that can move forward relatively quickly.
Good afternoon, Chris Robinson, President of Robinson Muller Engineers, doing business at Huntington, 50 Elm Street, Huntington, New York. Just a couple other things to add to it. The option that we're looking in front of us with the map that was just up on the screen would really enable phase 1 of the sewer district and get the downtown district done in a fairly quick period of time. To get shovels in the ground within a year or so and get flow from the downtown district into the hospital plant that already has a Speedies permit for 104,000 gallons per day and has a little over 62,000 gallons available. So we can get this going very quickly, which would really kind of spur the infrastructure place to be put in. We can continue to work, and the village can continue to work with H2M on future locations of a future plant that could handle expansions of phase 2, 3, and some of the other areas you want to sewer in the district. But the intent of this option here is to get sewer in a pipe quick, sewer in a treatment plant quick, and out of the ground, and reduce the nitrogen load that eventually makes its way to Lake Agawam in the area in a very quick manner. Something that's been studied, as Frank said, for 50 years and has been kicked around for a long time. This is a great opportunity to get that in the ground. The flexibility of the design, we did look at very similar to H2M, the both ideas of doing it down the main street, but would require some internal plumbing within basements or crawl spaces in the building to get out to the front, or do infrastructure through the rear parking areas, whether it be low pressure sewer or gravity sewer. So our numbers are actually very similar to what H2M talked about. So, it gives us some flexibility. We broke it up into some smaller phases. Again, we can look at the individual parcels and how they can connect and come up with the ultimate number. As long as it's under 62,200, we feel very comfortable that we can handle most of the downtown village at this phase. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you very much. My name is Mike Kelly, Kelly Development. I've been working with Frank and Chris and Matt over the past 7 or 8 months. Overall, I've built over 2,300 homes across Nassau and Suffolk. I've been involved in the build out of several pump stations and sewage treatment plants out here in Suffolk County. To reiterate what Matt and Chris both said, we looked at what's the quickest way to get in the ground and to get pipe from Southampton Town Hall down to a pump station down at the northeast corner of Lake Agawam. And really the quickest way is to run a gravity system down Main Street to that location. That would involve, as what Nick had mentioned, coming out the front of each one of these businesses and buildings, connecting into a main in the middle of Main Street. From there, we would build a pump station at that location at the northeast corner, which would then run the effluent into a force main, which would run down to Southampton Hospital. So, in terms of costs, both Chris and Nick touched on the overall numbers. I think that's fair. Again, what we would do is work with the team to essentially value engineer everything as we move along, because there are many steps still ahead of us. So that's about it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, let me be brief. The issue in front of the commission as we see it is whether we're going to act now or continue to wait for some future event before we act. And after 50 years of degradation, we think it's time. Number two, the issue as described by H2M, who I must tell you have been nothing but professional and wonderful with us, so we'd like to thank them as brother engineers. But we'd also like to point out that in order to proceed, a complex infrastructure project needs expertise. They need committed personnel. This is not something that governments are equipped to do, and in particular, not this government. The level of detail, the level of focus that takes to run an infrastructure project, almost of any size these days, is considerable. The level of focus required to run a village is considerable. Unless you want to double your staff, you're just not going to be able to do it. You do not have the development expertise, you don't have the financial expertise, you do not have the execution expertise. We bring that expertise to the fore. Most importantly, the reason you want to do this with Light Tower is that we bring a different approach, which is the utility approach, which is something you do all the time with PSE&G, Verizon, natural gas. This is a cooperative co-venture. It's municipally led, meaning we take our direction from the village. It's privately executed. We do what you want us to do, but on our terms and speed, much quicker and much less expensive than most municipal projects. And it's publicly accountable as every utility should be. That's what we bring here. I'd also like to point out that without that development expertise, it's very difficult to move through this. We believe that there is, for example, a sewer district in place that should be brought up to speed quickly and with whom we would contract to execute on these services. So on those bases, because of our developmental expertise, our financing expertise, our legal expertise, our utility expertise, all of which is described in detail in section 7 of our report, where we outline the differences between a public model, which has been prevalent on Long Island with obvious results, in our view, not productive, and the public utility model, private utility model, which we would suggest can get this job done and get it done now. So our view is we'd like to proceed now. We have a Suffolk County Industrial Development Association guarantee of funding if we move now. And we would be happy to work with the Planning Commission, the village trustees, and H2M to accelerate this project so that we can see measurable, immediate progress towards Lake Agawam remediation prior to next Memorial Day. We're available for any questions that you may have. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss this proposal.
Make a few comments just to frame this, and then question and answer both from the commission and members of the audience. So I guess just to talk about what steps we're thinking about today, and to present to the trustees next month. The first is to authorize the map and plan to go forward, because whatever we decide to do, we need to form a sewer district for any of these things to happen. I would certainly say that's probably significantly overdue at this point, and that takes a period of time. We are extremely fortunate in the village because the village attorney is one of the experts on Long Island in forming sewer districts. I think it's going to be very helpful as we move forward. But that's the first step. Second is, and again, just in terms of comments today, this phasing developed out of a desire to address the most critical problems first, and to try to figure out a way to move something in a shorter period of time. It usually takes 3 to 5 years to move a sewer ahead. I don't think that's necessarily bad in the infrastructure world, but it is a long period of time for a business center that needs more immediate attention. So, comments on the phasing are very helpful. Third, then, is sort of the various options of municipal plant versus private utility. Obviously, advantages and disadvantages to both. So with that, open it up to questions. I guess
I have a question.
Yeah.
Regarding that property north of the village, outside the village, there's a sewer treatment plant across the street, but there's also a Suffolk County well field. Now, has anybody checked with the water authority that having 2 sewer treatment plants within approximately of a well field is going to be a problem?
Yeah, we haven't looked at the actual proximity of the well field, there needs to be a certain setbacks in the production wells.
Okay.
You gotta get up to a microphone.
Yep. Me?
Yes, that site was identified by the planning commission. We haven't delved into it in terms of setbacks from production well fields. So there is restrictions associated with that.
And the other sewer treatment plant up there, can that take any extra capacity, or is that maxed out?
I'm not sure which treatment plant you're talking about.
It's the one at the nursing home there.
Yeah, most likely it would not, but we would have to look at that.
Okay.
I believe it's an IA plant, actually. Isn't it an IA plant?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's a river.
Yeah.
Can we address
Yeah, I can add a little more to that too. We did
till you
look,
get to the final.
sorry, yeah. We did look at that plant. I believe it's an SBR plant. It's a little small. It certainly cannot be expanded. There's certainly not enough area to handle it. But one thing I would like to say just on the phasing and the plant location, the root of the question is actually is excellent because it ties into the fact of expeditious time frame to get this moving. By using the Southampton plant where we have 62,000 gallons a day available, we would look to do a phase 1 in town, take the existing sewer flow that's in town. But it ties very closely with what H2M's proposed about a new plant location, where in the future, once the village settles on a piece of property, identifies a piece of a plant, goes through a CEQA process, goes through the process to get a treatment plant approved, the downtown flow can be being treated in the Southampton Hospital plant. At some future time, once that plant is ready, the pump station can be redirected, take the downtown flow, and bring it to the new plant location. And then the existing Southampton Hospital plant can be used to really handle the expansion that's ideally on the easterly side of town. So they try to really work together in order to get flow going right away. Because ideally, from what I heard from the presentation, you want to have some extra capacity to do improvements, additional restaurants, additional things in the village, which the Southampton Hospital plant currently wouldn't allow unless we made it a very smaller phase one. But it certainly gives us the opportunity to step this forward and bring it out to where it eventually needs to be.
I should point out, thank you, sorry. I believe, and Nick, please correct me if I'm wrong, but to get the sewer district approved by the county, we're gonna have to show that, and the reason for the analysis that Nick did is we're gonna have to show it can accommodate future growth. Whereas you can't do a sewer district that you start out with, it cannot accommodate any growth because they know there will be growth. So you have to have a plan at least that shows how you're gonna, you're not necessarily doing it day one, but you do have to have a plan that shows how you accommodate the growth. So the growth that Nick talked about that is the theoretical possible growth in the village business district as we've, I think, experienced over the last 10 years. That growth is gonna be very slow at best, but it is something you have to have the plan for. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a,
Go ahead, Mark, go ahead.
Either way.
well, I think the analyses are very good. Thank you very much for the presentations. I have two concerns about the hospital plant and using the hospital plant. Number one is that, from what I understand, is that their capacity is tied to the number of beds, of the hospitals. And if they were to give up some of their capacity, the number of beds would have to be reduced and their use of the property. So this, I think, is a discussion to have with whether it's actually feasible that they would reduce the number of beds. The second concern that I have to increase the capacity of the sewage treatment plant at that location is that it is, in my view, one of the prime areas in the village. There's the Keene development right there. You have the Fordoon development, which is just down the street. I mean, it is a very, very, very prime area. And to have a sewage treatment plant of around 80,000 gallons per day capacity, will require trucks, will require maintenance, will require, there's no question, it is a sewage treatment plant where there may have some environmental concerns. So I think there's these two elements I think should be studied.
So I can definitely address both of those questions. The first question about the number of beds. So the study that we performed, we took the existing number of beds in the hospital and factored every single one of those beds in, regardless of occupancy at the time. So the amount of flow that is allocated to the hospital still in our study accounts for every single bed in the hospital. There would be no reduction of beds. There would be no reduction of capacity for those beds. So that's already factored in. So that's when we do our math, and as you go through the report, you'll be able to see that when we do that math, it shows that based on health department standard rates, health department standard strengths, so we're taking no reduction whatsoever in flow, in waste strength, in capacity at all for those hospital beds. So there would be no effect to the hospital in any way to be able to make these connections that we're
I
proposing.
have a question about that. So, and I'm going to get this wrong, but I'll do the best I can. I think that, isn't the hospital originally licensed for something like 803 beds? They're currently only using 189 or 198 or something
I
like that.
believe the number is 125 currently.
Right,
Yeah,
so.
it's based on that 125
Correct,
number
I
is
just
what our
want
math is
to,
based
I'm
on.
not disagreeing
Yeah.
with anything you said. I just want to point out that
And I could easily explain why the treatment plant is so big to begin with, because maybe they were, I honestly, I didn't know that number, the 800 number that you just quoted, but that could explain easily why the treatment plant was sized as large as it was back in the 70s when it was originally built.
Right.
But
Right.
they currently are operating with
Right.
that number of beds, and that, as far as we know, is
That's an ancient model. I
Right.
mean, I don't think anyone would run a hospital that way anymore.
right.
No one does. However, just point out, and I should say make an editorial comment since we're all throwing around using someone else's property, which we have a habit of doing, but, you know, any of these will require the Southampton Hospital Corporation, which owns the property, to agree that this is something that they want to do.
Yes.
And the issue of how many beds you count or how much capacity you keep to the hospital is really is a decision they will have to agree to.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Paul, I want to ask a question. I think the village owns 20 acres up near the Tuckahoe School. In that area, there was a shooting range for the police department up there.
If I may, before we get to that, I would just like to answer his second question, if that's all right.
Yeah.
And then we can
Right.
talk about that. You had asked about environmental concerns relative to the area around the hospital. The treatment plan is already existing, so any environmental concerns that you would have are already there. So there's no increase in any constraints. I mean, there still are trucks coming and going. There's already the potential for odors, which we would of course address as part of the upgrade. Would be addressing any potential odors, things of that nature. So it doesn't really change the status quo.
So in terms of if the plant presumably is not at top capacity right now, if the flow was closer to top capacity, would that increase the trucks or odors, or is there any substantial change?
The more flow you have, the more sludge production there is. So you might have a few more visits of sludge trucks that are hauling sludge away throughout the year, but not anything that I would call significant.
You had mentioned, or one of you mentioned that the max of the flow is 100,000 gallons. That's what that's been for. And as you all may know, the hospital is planning on moving to the college. So once that happens, in theory, the other additional 40,000 gallons that they are using could be available. Now, how would that, in theory, factor into the phase 2 and 3 of the plan, if that were to become available in its entirety?
Absolutely, good question. So if the hospital does decide to move to another location, the amount of flow that they are using certainly would become available at that time. So in the event that that happens, you could easily adjust your planning for which parcels are connected to the hospital plant or to another plant elsewhere. There are a number of different options.
Because our discussion with the hospital, because we are looking to put a zoning plan in place once they do move, they have said to us, to the village, that whoever is going to buy that property will most likely demolish the main building. So that's the main source of the wastewater, I would assume. So we have to consider that property as a vacant parcel when we consider to rezone it. So
Yeah, absolutely. So it's my assumption, and H2M guys, please correct me if you disagree, but it's my assumption that that parcel would be redeveloped, and the redevelopment of that parcel would have to be factored in to the treatment plant plan.
What I'm saying is most likely that the building will be demolished, and
Yeah.
So
So for example, on the acreage that you have there on the hospital property, if you were to build residential homes or even multifamily homes, something of that nature, it would be less than the 40,000 that the hospital is currently using. So it can be factored in. And it, as you mentioned, it's a high-end area there. You're not going to have any kind of industrial type facilities or, at worst you might have some restaurants or something, but even then, the 40,000 gallons that the hospital is currently using would be more than enough to accommodate the new development of that land.
Right, I don't want to, I just don't want to spend all our time today on the hospital plant, but I would just point out again, that's a decision that the Southampton Hospital Corporation would ultimately have to make, which is their ability to sell their land with a sewer plant attached, and how much of that capacity they think they need for that. So I'd like to just follow up on, thank you. Bob's quick question.
Yeah.
So that is land, Gary, that's owned by the village?
Yeah, it's a police shooting range, and it's a DPW transfer facility.
And the salamander.
Well, Tiger Salamander.
Tiger salamander.
Okay,
And I wanted to ask your low-pressure pipe that's going to pump, what size and how far can you pump with that? If, for example, we had a location in the village, could we pump it up to Tuckahoe?
do you wanna, Nick, do you wanna answer that?
Yeah, the size of the pipe depends on the flow. Typically, they range from 4-inch and up to whatever, depending on flow. As far as routing it and how far you can push it, it all depends. It needs to be engineered. You know, you can design pumps to push it pretty far away with significant flow. So depending on these different site locations, it would be evaluated, and then as things progress, you would refine the design to really identify what you would need to do.
Nick,
But as
how far is the plant that West Hampton Beach is using from the, from the,
they're pumping a little
Main
over,
Street?
yeah, they're pumping a little over 5 miles.
Yes, I don't think anything we're talking about is that far, so,
Yeah, I think a little further than 5 miles.
yeah.
I'm looking at, the village
Yeah.
already owns the property.
Yeah,
And
yes.
it's not being used, and it's basically, it's really in a secluded area. Whereas if you put it next to the cemetery, that is a commercial area in there. I don't think that would be a good location.
And Bob, to your point, you have the highway and the state and the county do when you're crossing the highway under, under the road there.
Well, right now, we're looking at the hospital. If we can use the hospital, I think that'd be the alternative,
Yes.
right? But the alternate would be to go up to the village property that they already own.
I want to talk about one other issue that came up and sort of give a little more explanation of it. Nick talked about the two options for the piping in the village. The planning commission, as a result of the village business district plan, had always looked at a redesign and reconstruction of the parking lots, which certainly badly needed, as anyone can see if they look outside. And we all made a decision over the winter, I think it was, that it didn't make sense to do that until we knew what we were doing with the sewers. And one of the things I think that is certainly nice about the way the village is laid out is you could, as Mr. Bono explained, you could place the pipes in the parking lots, which is the direction that currently the buildings are serviced in. And for us, I think in part, you're doing two things at once, which is creating new parking lots and addressing infrastructure at the same time. I think everyone who's looked at West Hampton, and they're through it, and everyone tends to forget. And I tell you, I watched Washington go through building a subway system that everyone thought had killed the city off. As soon as it was done, everyone forgot that they had ever built it, and it just became great. But I do think there is a lot of disruption involved, certainly with running a sewer line down Main Street and the number of months that access becomes difficult.
It would disrupt the commercial, I know that West Hampton, they had a lot of troubles.
Right, so it is an additional cost, but I think we are fortunate to have at least the potential to run the lines in the parking lot.
So I have a follow-up question to that point, which is, how much would it cost a building owner to move their sewage access to the front, to access a line in the front versus the rear? I mean, and who would bear that cost?
Everything inside harbor.
It all depends on the building configuration, whether you're slab on grade, crawl space, basement, you gotta get to that pipe and re-divert it. A lot of these buildings there's no setback. They're building to building to building right on lot line, so you can't even reroute around the
You have to
building.
go through the basement of your building?
Yeah, to reroute, and bearing of that cost would be on the building owner to connect. Just like these are all commercial properties here, each property owner would technically be responsible for the commercial abandonment of their on-site disposal system. That's pretty typical, unless you're looking at certain funding, and whoever's owning the system, that the funding source requires you to own everything. Meaning the building pipe all the way to the connection point, if you're looking to do that.
So for the septics that are behind the buildings, I know it probably varies, but how far behind the building are they typically?
Oh, it all depends. They could be right there. They're typically gonna be a minimum of 5 to 10 foot off,
But you
depending
can
on
generally
slab or
tap
basement.
that pipe out of the building, so you don't generally have to go into the building? if you're gonna tap to
Yeah,
the
if it's
rear?
coming out, you're not going in the building, you're intercepting the pipe that's already exiting the building.
I'm gonna, on Job's Lane, I'm a retired plumber, most of the septic systems, in fact, all of them along Main Street and Job's Lane come out the back of the buildings. That's where the cesspools are. And I own a building on Job's Lane, I have about 25 feet before I hit the village property line, and that's how the rest of them are. So it'd be more practical to put that sewer line,
So how much would it cost you, because you know, you own that building, you're a plumber,
yeah.
to reroute to the front?
If I had to go out the front, everything would have to be ripped out and changed to go out the other
What would that
direction.
probably cost you?
Yeah, and everybody along the street would be faced, and both sides of the street, including Main Street.
$50,000? I mean, it's expensive.
Oh, it would be horrendous. I mean, I think the owners, I mean, everybody would like to have a sewer system, but the additional cost, I think that would raise some eyebrows. I think the most practical way is to go behind the stores. Since we want to redo the parking lots, that's the way to do it. And the other thing I've always been stressed on is dropping the electric underground.
Right, all the other utilities that are in the
Yeah,
Main Street.
yes.
Right.
itself.
Since you're digging up the area there, let's put them, that way if we have a hurricane,
Right.
there's nothing to
Right,
get
right.
destroyed.
Yeah. So it's both, I mean, I think what's attractive in some ways for us is it's both an infrastructure project and a sewer project addressing infrastructure issues in the village that we all know we've needed to address for a long time. So,
But I think that it would behoove us to really review that site that is being
Yeah, yeah.
studied here. I think, I always thought that the site next to the cemetery was a very good site, you know, very appropriate location for a sewer treatment plant right next to a cemetery. And it could be, you know, but I think that another site could,
But the village already owns this property, and if you're pumping something, all you have to do is either increase your pipes or increase the pump size, and just pump it up there.
fine.
It'd be a lot cheaper than,
Right.
first thing, you gotta negotiate with the people who buy the property.
right.
Right, but the idea is that, well, a portion of that property is owned by the cemetery association, which they are not using, and they can only sell that property for a community purpose, for a community benefit purpose.
Well, I'll give you an example. I was on the Sacred Hearts Parish Council, and our cemetery is getting close to maximum filled, and we don't have any more property. So I don't know what's going on with Southampton Cemetery, but I don't know whether they'd be willing to sell any more property because they couldn't buy any more property. There's no more vacant property around them.
Another
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
On another topic. I know in the past we've talked about these IA units or some combination of smaller units. Could someone explain if that's viable as opposed to maybe in addition to the Southampton Hospital plant, if that's available? Could you supplement that with some smaller units rather than building another centralized plant?
Yeah, the IA systems, again, they would essentially assume the place of your existing on-site disposal systems. They also don't allow for increased density. They're not in place of a treatment plant. They're in place of your on-site disposal system to improve the quality of water being discharged from it. So essentially for your downtown area, down in here, commercially, it really isn't a viable alternative. You know, you can look at cost of putting an IA in when you factor in the municipal plan of sewering. It may be very close to the same cost per property, and you're not getting the same benefit in terms of the water quality that you're gonna be discharging.
I have spoken to installers of these systems, and they disagree with your assessment. They said that you could, with the proper system, you could utilize what uses, convert dry to wet.
To convert dry to wet as a commercial system, you're gonna require a lot more leaching area that you otherwise don't have space for. You're
It's
not gonna
tied-
be able to fit it on the property.
The density is tied to the size of the lots. And in the village, we have very, very small lots. So that's why it's not really feasible to use those IA systems in this.
On the other hand, I think we did think, because one of the things that the reports from the Clean Water Committee talked about was the need to address the houses on the lake. And we do think, I believe, that IA's systems are
That-
really a good,
yeah.
a good potential to address those issues.
Yeah, to replace those antiquated systems. One of the other things that has come up, and I know it's a little out of the box here is Stony Brook is leasing from the hospital. We all know they're relocating to the campus when they build a new facility. When they build that facility, they're building a treatment plant. Again, it requires third-party input, meetings, discussions, but there could be some type of alternative there too if the state university system is receptive to forming some type of agreement with the village so that you don't have to build a treatment plant. You can leverage that treatment plant, which is being built and can accommodate, if they decide to do so, the full build-out of what the village is looking to do. Again, that was an alternative. I didn't want to dig into it because we haven't even facilitated meetings with Stony Brook, but I figured it appropriate to bring up now.
I'd like to ask another question. On the sewer treatment plant, what's the plans for taking care of the treated water? You put it into a lake, injection wells back in the ground?
It would be discharged back into the ground, depending on size and area. Most likely it would go back through leach pools, not open beds, because the area for the setbacks with open beds would require a significant amount more acreage.
Okay, you also mentioned about the sludge being removed. Now, in one of my plumbing textbooks, I remember reading about a sewer treatment plant in one of the cities where they treated the sludge and they were able to turn it back into fertilizer. Is that a feasible option?
To go classified biosolids, Class A biosolids,
Yeah.
to do that, it's feasible, but it all comes with a cost too, operational cost.
It will be feasible.
Again, when we get rid of sludge, where does the sludge have to go? What's the cost of hauling the sludge away?
The sludge has to get hauled, and it has to get hauled to an approved disposal facility.
Bergen Point.
And there, yeah, and there are different tipping fees. Tipping fees vary. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head right now.
But I think it's also possible that we could treat the water to, like they do in California, where it could be recycled and maybe reused for.
That was gonna be my next question.
landscaping,
In
for
Florida, what they're
irrigation,
doing
for
is they're sending
golf
all the water
course.
to golf clubs now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think they're using purple pipe as the color
Yes,
code.
exactly.
Riverhead is doing that now, and it's only seasonal, unlike Florida where they can do it year-round.
Yes.
So you still need to discharge the water back to the ground during the
Again,
non-seasonal.
we have a seasonal population. This is, what we're going through now is an unusual situation. But most of the time after Labor Day, our population just nosedives.
Mhm.
And just as a follow-up on the IA, so just so I understand it, there is a potential of larger leaching areas under the parking lots, but that still wouldn't be, the question is, would that be feasible with a larger leaching area?
I guess it would have to be evaluated, but it wouldn't be ideal. Even though it's an IA system, it's still essentially an on-site disposal system. You are gonna have maintenance on your leaching pools. You know, there is stuff that's gonna pass that septic tank and potentially bind up those pools, so, you know, it wouldn't be ideal. It's facilities that would have to be maintained. You're locating it in the parking lot. Now these would be municipal systems that the municipality would own and have to maintain it. You know, I think when you start going down that path to evaluate it, it makes more sense to put a pipe into a central treatment location as opposed to having these.
So the central plants are better at just generally processing and maintaining.
You can't
well.
even compare them to the IA system.
Uh-huh.
It's different technology, different treatment process, totally different effluent water quality.
I have a concern about the dynamic between a municipality and a private enterprise and serving the public, where long-term the municipality is going to become captive to the private enterprise. How does that dynamic function, and what's your experience in that field?
Thank you for that question. The answer is you have decades of experience of being a captive to a utility, whether it's water, electronics, heat, electricity, etc. So this would be very similar. There's a service agreement that covers those types of situations, and we would enter into that service agreement with the sewer district. So you're not captive any more than you are captive to PSE&G, National Grid, etc. The pressures on Light Tower and the operating utility, Suffolk Water and Sewer Company, are such that we must remain competitive to IO systems, competitive to a municipal-owned system, but we achieve that through economies of scale and by being, as I said, municipally led, privately executed, and publicly accountable. So these are transparent relationships, and there is no real opportunity for a sort of captive situation. That's generally how most utilities work.
Well, it would be captive. If there's a disagreement between the municipality and the private enterprise, the
Well,
municipality
captive,
will not be able to make a change.
your use of the word captive, when you enter into a contract with National Grid, you have a contract with National Grid. There's nobody else joining that, when the same with any other utility. So providing a utility service means you recognize the cost and expense of a major infrastructure project, and therefore you have a relationship with them. It doesn't mean that if the utility fails to perform, that they can't be removed. That's part of the discussion. So our incentive is to continue to provide high level of service so that those sort of termination provisions are not triggered.
So there's a termination provision? What happens in that case when there's a termination? What happens to the,
Well, then that, if you take a look at the sewer agency, the Suffolk County Sewer Agency, which is another agreement, they would be the regulating entity here. It would be the same as if Southampton Hospital failed to perform and manage its sewage treatment plant effectively. In that case, the sewer agency would take over and the county would take it over.
so the county would take over the sewer system?
Correct, through the sewer agency. Remember, there are 260 or 230 odd privately owned, operated, and maintained sewage treatment systems in the county. So they have massive experience in exactly this kind of arrangement. I will tell you that they are very excited that we will come in and help create a more uniform, standardized approach across that. So they don't view it as captive, they view it as additive.
And bottom line, wouldn't the municipality be better off owning its own system versus?
I'm having trouble hearing you, it was behind the mask.
Bottom line, wouldn't the municipality be better off owning a system that is so important to the vitality of the village versus farming it out to somebody else?
So the issue of ownership, you do not own your electric system, pretty critical. You do not own your heating system, very critical. You don't own your water system, very critical.
Different.
Not really.
We
You
can't-
have a history,
We cannot create our own electric plant. We cannot,
on the contrary. Were you to go to California, Florida, you would see that there are smaller electric plants, there are smaller heating plants, there are municipal plants in Rockville Center, in Freeport, in Greenport. There are electric plants. So that's not really different.
so there is an advantage to that as well.
They're finding it's not so, because the economies of scale that utilities bring
That's the point I
cannot
was
be.
gonna make.
Yes.
That is,
The economies of scale that are providing for a
Exactly.
firm like
So
Lightower.
with water, electric, things of that nature, you have to have a certain economies of scale. With a sewer system, you really don't, because sewer system is contained within the village and the
To the
municipality.
extent a water system is similar to a sewer system, and our purpose is to extend beyond just one plant in Southampton Village. We want to be very much involved in the discussion on the County 39 plant. We are in discussions concerning the LIU plant.
How
So-
does that benefit the municipality? of
Because all
Southampton?
of those are economies of scale in terms of operations, in terms of maintenance, in terms of capital costs, in terms of monitoring, in terms of the quality of service. So that is exactly why, precisely why, the county has said to us, this is a great model that could be helpful across all 238 other plants that are outstanding, that are very individualistic. A utility works well on size. Our job is to convince the village and be a partner with the village, executing on the village's plan, executing on Route 39, executing on LIU, being in a position where we can discuss things with the hospital or with the town that would be much more challenging for the village and the trustees to discuss. And so, as your representative, we would look to create a broader system.
What I thought was interesting, though, is that your proposal is limited to the center of the village, of phase one, and you're not really involved with the other phases. Now, so therefore, we'd have to have a hybrid of a,
So let me address that.
so,
Let me
so I
address
mean,
that.
so there's a hybrid where part of the municipality is private, the other part of the municipality is public. At that point, why just not make it all public?
Or why not make it all private? Because we have focused on this phase for many reasons, a lot of them regulatory. It doesn't mean we are not interested in the other phases. We are extremely interested in those other phases. And so for us, this is step one. Step 2 and 3 are things we will be happy to discuss, because we've had discussions with the town and the hospital about other opportunities as well. So you have hit all the correct issues, but our job is to demonstrate to you that, as I said, municipally led, privately executed, publicly accountable, like any other utility.
Thank you. I want to stop this here because we have a time limit. The ZBA is going to be meeting at 6.
Thank you.
Are there questions about other aspects of Nick's study in the plan? Chris?
Just in relation to the shopkeepers downtown or the
Yeah.
property owners downtown, if you ran this plan that's proposed down here, would the property owners be required to hook up to it,
Nick, do you want to?
disconnect to their systems?
It all depends on the model, right? If it's a municipal model, there would have to be a sewer code that's established, and there would have to be certain regulations embedded in that sewer code, many of which typically require you to connect within a year of availability to service. You know, because you're not gonna build a system, have people option out of it, and not have the flow to accommodate what you need. So it would be managed, and it would be something that would be enforceable by the village. How they do it is another thing, but it would be part of the sewer code.
And you'd want that.
You would want that.
Yeah, you
And I
really
think the
want
pro-
that
I think
because
the-
again, I think the ultimate goal here in part is you're trying to clean up all of the wastewater. You know, you just, and I think one of the problems we've had when we looked at IA is we could certainly address some of the wastewater problems. It's a very difficult option to address all the wastewater problems. And so it's a very good question. And I think that's part of, doing the map and plan is to figure out what period of time and what financial assistance might be available to those owners.
Well, yeah, the map and plan is to define the sewer system as well as service area and the associated cost and tax implications with that. So right now, these alternatives, we need to flush them out. We need to identify an alternative. Map and plan isn't to identify alternatives. The map and plan is to put the map and plan in place on which you're gonna form your sewer district for the village.
Other
Just
questions?
the same question, what
Yeah.
would Light Towers plan be about connections, would it be mandatory?
The Light Towers connection,
So, once again, Light Tower's view is we're listening to the village. We're executing on the village's plan. Our understanding is the village would like to have a map and plan in a sewer district. We agree. This is not an à la carte arrangement, but there are many ways to address all of these issues. And whether or not tonight's the forum for that remains to be seen. But this is not an unusual situation, and I believe there are plenty of alternatives available to make everyone comfortable on that effect.
All right, so as I said at the beginning, we are going to be at the trustees meeting next month. Is there a general consensus on the commission that we want to go forward and recommend that the trustees approve proceeding with a map and plan and further study of, I guess, 2 items, both the options and the per building cost of those options? Is that something we comment,
Is there a
discussion?
large cost with the map and plan?
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, right now, I think the alternatives analysis needs to get flushed out. As far as cost associated with a map and plan, we have the framework together already. You know, the village did pay H2M to put a map and plan together. the overall area of that mapping plan is somewhat consistent with phase 1 and 2. Phase 3 is additional areas, so there would be some additional effort. I can't tell you right now what the cost would be, but I can tell you it won't be what it was the first time around, because we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're building off of what was already developed. We can talk more about that, but I really think the treatment plant site options need to be vetted further so that that can be clear, because right now it was really kind of high level looking at a general location. There are other alternatives out there. We need to look at those. And really need to look at the municipal model versus the privatized model, private utility model.
One other question, are we looking into it, is that if we take the plant, put it up in Tuckahoe, there are several golf courses up there. What's the feasibility of getting the golf courses to start using that water in the summertime? Because they do water a lot.
It all depends. Are they private golf courses, public
Yeah,
golf
they're all
courses?
private up there.
So they're all private golf courses. It would require additional conversations with them. As far as tackling that as part of the map and plan, I don't think it's appropriate off the bat. I think that's something that can evolve after you establish the district. If it's something that you want to evaluate to see what is the benefit there, because what I see it being more costly to add that to the treatment process when it's otherwise not needed as far as your permit is going to go on what you're allowed to discharge. So I don't know what benefit you're going to realize by doing that.
I think it would put us in the forefront. I think this is the right thing to do, is to try to reuse the water, especially in Long Island.
Unless it's paid for by the end user, which is the golf courses.
Right, but I think
Because it doesn't make sense to have your district users paying for this added cost that they're essentially not seeing a benefit on.
I know the golf courses have to have meters on how much water they can pull out and so on like that. I think Suffolk County
Right.
Health Department watches them, how much water they can pump.
Right now, in Southampton Village, we are like really lucky in terms of there hasn't been that much of a problem, but other community like Hampton Bays, where they have a terrible problem, where there's no water pressure. So it would be the right thing to do if we could reuse some of that water.
Yeah, it would be a separate study. I don't think it's appropriate right now when you're doing the conceptual formation of a district. That's more of a modification to how you're operating, if there's any side benefits that you could realize from the
But
facility.
could it be designed in a plant, and if that's the case?
It could be. It could be. We added it on to Riverhead, and that was mutually beneficial for the county golf course adjacent to them.
There's a golf course
They
right
had-
next to the plant.
They had water quality issues with iron fouling of their groundwater wells that they were extracting. They also wanted to reduce what they were extracting from the ground. And Riverhead also had a permit to meet, and they discharged to the Peconic River. So anything they can divert from the river reduces the amount of mass that they're putting in the river. So, that was a unique situation. Here, it sounds like it would be slightly different, but I'm sure there's a cost-benefit analysis that could be done to weigh out, is this, at the end of the day, is this cheaper or beneficial to both the municipality and the end user?
Let me add that one of the, I think, the next phases is really under the leadership of the trustees, to talk to the town, which is a big user in the village, the county certainly because of its regulatory, and as we did last time, the state and federal government both have grants that we look at. So I think part of the next phase is the further governmental exploration than what we've done now. Do we have agreement that we will go
Make a
ahead?
motion.
Okay,
Second.
Second.
everyone agreed?
Aye.
Okay. All right, thank you. I want to mention two other things tonight, very quickly. Well, one other thing in particular, which is, I think we've all noticed that this summer is different from other summers in many ways, but also we have a higher population here, and I think all indications are that will be the case through the fall, as some of the people in the audience mentioned. I also think as fall and winter, and as we look forward, it is, I think, highly likely, or at least possible, that we'll have that population staying for longer periods of time, over a longer period of time. Let's say that twice. So one of the things we've been asked by the trustees to look at is what that means for our planning as we move ahead when we don't have quite the typical post-Labor Day trough that we've had in the past, and what that means, maybe what the village used to be like many, many years ago, when it had the bigger year-round population. So that's one of the things we're gonna be asked to look at.
It'll be good for business.
Yep. Okay, thank you. I want to thank everyone in the audience.
Thank you.